Lowepost.com, and I'm back again with the next lesson in our Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here for Lowepost.com, and I'm back again with the next lesson in our Conform series. And in this lesson, we're talking about offline reference clips. When the offline editor passes off the final locked edit to you, the Conform artist, you're going to need to make sure that everything lines up exactly the way that it needs to, and make sure that the colorist has a point of reference for them to start doing their job. That's where the offline reference clip comes into play, which is just simply an exported QuickTime file of the final production with timecode that matches the timecode in the edit. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to bring that in, lock it up with your timeline, use it as a comparison by adding a wipe to the screen to see the before and after, and some other little tips and tricks that you can utilize in situations where you're missing media in your timeline. Alright, now before we get rolling, I do have my offline reference clip here on the desktop. You'll see it's pretty much looking exactly like you would expect it to look coming from an offline. The daily's having all the timecode burnt in, but I have gone in and I have made some color grade changes to some of the shots just to simulate what would happen in the crossover from the offline to the online. In most cases, the offline editor will be making decisions like that in the edit suite with the director just to give the colorist sort of a direction that they want to go so they can get in and prep as much as they can before the session starts. Now let's Command or Alt and Tab into DaVinci Resolve, and we are going to navigate to the desktop to bring in our offline reference clip. Now you might be thinking we're simply going to take the clip, drag it and drop it down into our project, and we are all set to go. However, that's not quite how this workflow works. We need to assign this clip to being an offline reference clip. So let's do that. I'm going to right click on the clip, and I'm going to come down to Add as Offline Reference Clip. Now you'll notice that as soon as I do that, the clip has appeared in here, but the thumbnail icon is a little bit different. It looks like that checkerboard background, as opposed to looking like our timeline that's currently called an AAF or any one of our clips that currently live in our project. Now something else that's exceptionally important that I point out right now at this step is that the first thing you're going to want to do once you get that offline reference file into Resolve is double check that its timecode matches the timecode of your timeline. Remember, it is referencing your timeline, and the only way for it to actually reference it is by timecode. It's not like when you're doing multicam and you can use endpoints or anything like that. The timecode has to match. So let's now talk about how we're going to set this up. I'm just going to come back to the edit module for 1 second. I am working in dual display mode here, which is perfectly fine. I'm going to show you how this works in both dual display mode and in single display mode. What we are going to do is we're going to navigate to our timeline. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to come down to timelines, and I'm going to link the offline reference clip to the offline reference clip.mov that we brought into Resolve. Now you'll notice that nothing has apparently happened. It's still just the clip over here in the preview window and our timeline over on the right hand side, getting ready to prep this timeline for the grade. So how do we actually reference that timecode or that offline reference clip? What we're going to do is we're going to navigate right over here to this drop down. I'm going to click on it, and instead of choosing source, I'm simply going to choose offline. Now you'll notice that what Resolve is going to do is it's going to sync the offline reference clip with my timeline, and as I drag through, you'll see we now get a side-by-side comparison of the offline, or the offline reference clip, to what we have as our base color correction. We'll say it's actually a lookup table that's been applied in our Resolve timeline. Now this is how this works in a dual display configuration. Let me just switch back to the source for 1 second, and I'm going to switch back to single display. So how's this going to work in single display mode? Well, we're just going to make sure that our offline reference file is still there. It is perfect. And what we're going to do now is we're going to right click on the viewer, and all I'm going to do is choose either a vertical wipe or a horizontal wipe, and you'll now see that we can see through a wipe the difference between the offline and the online. Now it's really apparent right here. And in this case, we might actually want to switch to a horizontal wipe. There we go. Look at that. Look at the difference between our current setup right now and what the offline look like. Now, this is why the offline reference file is imperative and key to the workflow to give the colors, like I said, a direction to start to go in so they're ready when the director comes and sits beside them in the edit suite. All right, so let's now talk about how we can do this a couple other ways. What we're going to do is we're actually just going to switch this wipe off here. And if I head over to the color module, you'll see that what we have the ability to do in here, much like we did in the edit module, is that if I right click, I can come down and I can choose the wipe style between horizontal and vertical. We do have a few other options in here, but primarily you'll be sticking with these two. I'll just set it to vertical for right now. And all we have to do is come down now and say show reference wipe, and nothing happens. Now, why has nothing happened? Well, keep in mind, the color module is a little bit different than the edit module. You do have a couple other options that you can split screen in between. But what we want to do is we want to use our reference mode as not the gallery or the timeline, but offline. Now you'll see that we can show the reference clip, and you'll now see we can set this up vertically or horizontally, however we need it to be. Now let's backtrack just for 1 second here, because I did talk a little bit earlier about the timecode and how the timecode of the reference clip is imperative. Now let me show you what happens if you don't have it set up correctly. What we're going to do is switch back to dual display mode. I'm going to come back down and I'm going to set this to be my offline reference clip. Perfect. Everything's looking exactly the way that I want it to. However, that offline reference clip actually has the wrong timecode. What I'm going to do is navigate down to the clip attributes. I'm going to come to timecode, and I'm just going to give the current frame a value of 5 seconds. Now you're going to notice that when I say OK, that the image over in the preview window has changed. Now it's not that the image has changed, it's that what we're viewing has actually been switched back to the source clip that's in that monitor. Now you'll also notice that our timecode differs between our reference clip and the timeline. And if I come down now and I try to change this to offline, you'll see that what's happened is that the clip is there. However, because I've offset it by 5 seconds, it actually goes offline at the start of the clip. This is why it's imperative that those time codes line up, or you'll be caught in a situation like this, or potentially even media offline for the entire duration of the clip. Let's just come back. I'm just going to head back into my clip attributes. I'm going to come back to the timecode. We'll just make sure we set that value to be back at 0. We'll say OK. And we'll now have our reference file back to the way that we had it before, working perfectly like such. Now, let's talk about another interesting situation where you can use an offline reference clip. And what I'm going to do to show this to you is I'm actually going to turn off the top 2 layers here. Let's just right click. I'm just going to disable those clips. And here's the situation. You've gone through and you've quickly put together a rough grade for the client who's going to be coming in soon. However, there's a few clips in your timeline that actually are not in there yet. Maybe they're graphics, who knows what they might be. And you actually have some gaps in your timeline where you know you're going to be putting footage, but when you show it to the client, you really just don't want it to be a clip and then black and then another clip again. So believe it or not, there's a way inside of Resolve to have Resolve fill those gaps with the offline reference clip. So how are we going to go about doing this? What I'm going to do is I'm going to press Command and comma, Control and comma for all my Windows friends out there. And inside of the user settings, inside the editing module, if you take a look all the way down at the bottom, we have 2 preferences. One called Show Offline Reference Clips for Timeline Gaps and Show Offline Reference for Non-Conformed Edits. Now for right now, we're just going to choose Show Offline Reference for Timeline Gaps because I did add a gap in my timeline. I'm going to say save, and you'll see that if I come back to the beginning of the timeline, our first shot fades up, and take a look at what happens. There's no clip in my timeline, and I've turned these clips off. However, what Resolve has now done is it's added that reference clip in place of the clips that aren't there, the clip or clips that aren't there. So this way, no matter what happens, the client, the director or producer, will always see the timeline the way that it should be seen, whether they're looking at the grade that was put together by the colorist or the grade that was put together by the offline editor. Now let's talk about that other option, Command and comma, to get those preferences back. I'm just going to turn that option off because we do have one for show offline reference for non-conformed edits. I'm going to say save, and I'm just going to undo what I just did to get that clip back, and I'm going to re-enable these clips here. So what exactly does that mean? Let's actually go back into our preferences for 1 second here, and you'll see show offline reference for non-conformed edits. Now, what a lot of people get confused with this and think that it means is for offline media, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that right now. I'm just going to say cancel, and what I'm going to do is I'm purposely going to offline 2 of these clips, just like such. I'm going to right-click, I'm going to say unlink clips. You'll see those clips go offline in our timeline. Now you might be thinking that because we have show offline reference for non-conformed edits, that what Resolve should do is it should kick in at this point and say, oh, okay, well I'm going to put the offline reference clip here in these clips' place. That's not how this feature works. I'm just going to undo what I just did to get those clips back. And instead of removing the media or unlinking the media for these clips, I'm actually just going to delete the clips in general. Let's make sure all of our media is back, which it is. I'm going to select these 2 clips and I'm going to delete them from the media pool. Now here's where things get a bit tricky. You'll see that when I delete them from the media pool and I'm asked if I'm sure, I'm going to say remove, you'll see those clips have disappeared. However, I can still see what's going on because there you go. As soon as I click on the timeline, that offline reference clip has kicked in and is now taking the place of the clips that were there, so that no matter what happens, the client will always see what they need to see in the timeline. All right, now as always, if you have any questions, you have any comments, or ideas for upcoming lessons or courses,